Welcome to the Sci-Fi Rancher story. Here you find the best HFY story written by human. Listen the story. If you like it, subscribe the channel.
The icy wind howled through the cracks of the worn shelter, rattling the weak structure as the human shivered against the cold. His breath formed faint clouds. In the dim light, his fingers stiff as he wrapped his arms around himself. He had underestimated the temperature drop at night. And now, without proper insulation, he was paying the price. His muscles ached, his skin prickled, and the deep chill threatened to seep into his bones. He needed warmth fast. Then a voice cut through the silence, sharp, commanding, and laced with frustration. "Shut up, human. Stop shivering. We're freezing. Get in my bed." Now he turned sharply toward the source, her, the alien woman who had barely spoken to him since his arrival. She sat stiffly on the small cot, her strange luminous eyes locked onto him. With a mix of irritation and something else, he had never met anyone like her before. Her deep emerald skin shimmered faintly under the dim light. Her features, a mixture of human-like elegance and something distinctly otherworldly. Her voice held a bite of authority, yet there was a slight tremble in it, betraying her own discomfort. He hesitated. "Wait, you want me to? Don't make me repeat myself." She crossed her arms, her breath visible in the frigid air. "You'll die if you stay out there, and I refuse to let a human corpse take up my space." It wasn't exactly a warm invitation, but the temperature was making the decision for him. Swallowing his apprehension, he stepped forward. The cot was barely large enough for one person, and now he was supposed to share it. He hesitated again as he got closer, the air between them thick with unspoken tension. She clicked her tongue impatiently. "Just get in." The moment he slid under the rough blanket, the space became impossibly tight. His body pressed against hers, and he felt the heat radiating off her alien skin, a stark contrast to the surrounding cold. She stiffened as their legs brushed her muscles tense under his touch. "Too close," he muttered, half jerking. Her glare could have frozen him solid. "You think I care about that right now?" She turned away, shifting slightly, but there was nowhere to go. The warmth was already working, seeping into his frozen limbs. While they lay there in silence, the only sounds their slow, uneven breaths. He could feel the subtle rise and fall of her chest, the faint tremor still lingering in her body. Her scent was strange, but oddly soothing, something crisp and cool, like rain-soaked earth, mixed with a hint of metal. Then she spoke, quieter this time. "Humans run so cold." He exhaled a short laugh. "And you run hot." Her gaze flickered to him, and for the first time there was something less guarded in her expression, a quiet realization, maybe even curiosity. He felt her muscles slowly relax against him, as if against her own. "Well, this is working," she admitted, barely above a whisper. He nodded. "Yeah." As a strange tension settled between them, not just from the forced proximity, but something else entirely, something unspoken, simmering beneath the surface. The silence between them stretched heavy. An uncertain his body was finally warming up, but now he was acutely aware of something else, the softness of her against him, the strange sensation of her skin beneath the rough blanket they shared. She wasn't cold anymore, neither of them were, and yet neither of them moved away. The cot was too small for comfort, forcing them to press together in a way that felt more intimate than neither of them had anticipated. His arm was trapped awkwardly between them, his chest brushing against her back with every breath. He could feel the slow rise and fall of her body, the slight shift of her hips against his every movement was exaggerated in the cramped space. Every accidental brush a reminder of just how close they were. She exhaled sharply, as if frustrated with herself. "Stop breathing on me." He blinked. "What, you're—" She hesitated, gripping the edge of the blanket. "It's distracting." He couldn't help but smirk. "Sorry, but I do need to breathe." She made a low, irritated noise in the back of her throat, typical human. He wasn't sure what that meant, but something about the way she said it made his heart beat just a little faster. He should have been focused on getting through the night, but instead he found himself studying her in the dim light. The alien glow of her skin, the way her markings pulsed faintly along her arms, as if responding to something unseen. "I didn't think you'd actually care if I froze to death," he murmured, more to break the tension than anything else. She stiffened. "I don't." He raised her brow. Right. She didn't respond, but then so faint he almost didn't notice it. She shifted her body, pressing just a little closer against his. He swallowed. The warmth between them was growing, but it wasn't just from body heat anymore. There was something unspoken in the way she lingered against him, in the way her fingers twitched slightly against the blanket. Then softly she spoke again. "You're too warm," he repeated. Confused, she was quiet for a moment, and when she finally answered, her voice was barely above a whisper. "It's making my body react." His breath hitched. He didn't know what that meant, not exactly, but the way she said it made his pulse pound. In his ears, the air in the tiny shelter had shifted. The cold was no longer the most pressing thing between them. Instead, it was this charged, unspoken awareness crackling like static. In the space they shared, she hadn't moved away. In fact, she was pressing closer now, her body heat rolling off her in waves seeping into his skin. He was warm, too warm, and yet she didn't pull back. Her breath was steady but shallow. He could feel it against his collarbone. The soft exhale brushing his skin, the faint glow of her markings pulsed in a slow rhythmic pattern, as if syncing with the rise and fall of her chest. "You keep staring," she muttered. He blinked, realizing too late that he had been watching the gentle shift of her alien features, the way the dim light traced along her skin were different. He admitted, she scoffed, that there was no real bite in it. Observant a pause, then quietly she added, "But so are you something about the way." She said it sent a slow chill down his spine, one entirely unrelated to the cold. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of the wind outside seemed distant now, muffled by the weight of something heavier between them. It was strange. He had only known her for a short time, and yet lying here, tangled in this forced intimacy, it felt like something was unraveling between them. She was still staring at him, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly, as if debating something. He had the sudden unsettling feeling that she was listening not to his words, but to something deeper. Then, without warning, she shifted her fingers, moved hesitantly but deliberately, trailing the edge of the blanket. Where it met his arm, the touch was light. Barely there, but it sent a strange, electric sensation through him. His breath caught. "What are you doing?" She didn't answer at first. Instead, her fingers still resting lightly against his wrist. Then, almost as if testing something, she pressed her palm flat against his forearm. His skin prickled at the contact. Warmth pulled beneath her touch, spreading through him like a slow current. "I don't know," she murmured. "I just want to feel it." Her voice was softer now. Lacking its usual sharpness, it sent something deep and unfamiliar twisting inside him, and then, as if drawn by some unseen force, she leaned in. Her breath coasted against his skin, warm and uncertain. The space between them had disappeared, erased by the tentative press of her body against her touch. Once hesitant, grew bolder, her palm trailing up his arm, lingering at his shoulder, as if mapping the shape of him. He swallowed hard. "Are you sure about this?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, her fingers curled slightly, pressing into his skin, as if grounding herself. Then, in a voice fairly above a whisper, she admitted, "I don't know, but I don't want to stop." His pulse pounded loud and insistent. The air between them had shifted into something dangerous, something neither of them fully understood. Then, slowly, deliberately, she moved closer. Her face hovered just inches from his, her alien features softened by the dim glow of her markings. Her gaze flickered down, settling on his lips for the briefest of moments before she caught herself and looked away. But the damage was already done. He saw it. He felt it. The hesitation, the curiosity that pulled his throat went dry. She cut him off, not with words, but with action. Her lips brushed against his featherlight at first, as if testing something fragile, and knew a sharp inhale left his lungs. And before he could process it, she was kissing him again, this time firmer, as if coming to a decision in real time. Heat surged through him, erasing the last traces of cold from his body. Her hands slid up, fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt, anchoring herself against him. The moment deepened, their bodies drawn together by something instinctual, something neither of them had planned for. She pulled back just enough to look at him, her expression unreadable, her glowing eyes flickering with something unfamiliar. "Neither, I don't understand this," she murmured, her breath still mingling with his. "But I don't care." A shiver, not from the cold, but from something else entirely, ran down his spine. Neither did he. Her words lingered between them, heavy with meaning. He could feel her warmth pressed against him, the way her body molded instinctively to his, despite the unfamiliarity of it all. Her breathing had changed, no longer steady but uneven, as if she were wearing with something inside herself. And he felt it too, this pull, this undeniable gravity drawing them closer. His hands, which had remained frozen at his sides, finally moved tentatively, carefully. He reached for her, one hand skimming over the bare skin of her arm, tracing the faint glow of her Markings her breath hitched at the contact, the soft ridges of her alien skin were impossibly warm, almost feverish beneath his touch. "You're shaking," he whispered, her lips parted, slightly, her gaze flickering between his eyes and at his mouth. I don't know why he did this, was new to her, just as new as it was to him. The realization made something inside him tighten. He had no idea what rules governed her species, what boundaries he was about to cross, or whether this was something she would regret when the heat of the moment passed. But right now, none of that seemed to matter. Right now, she was the one closing the distance between them, and when she kissed him again this time, deeper, more certain, he knew there was no turning back. Her hands moved with newfound boldness, sliding up his chest, fingers curling at the nape of his neck, as if anchoring herself to him. The kiss deepened, slow and deliberate, her body pressing flush against his. He felt the steady rise and fall of her breath, the warmth of her skin seeping into him like fire. A quiet sound left her throat, somewhere between a sigh and a gasp, as his hands found her waist. He held her, their fingers flexing against the smooth curve of her body. She didn't pull away. She only melted into him. The cot was too small, the air too thick, the space between them vanishing entirely. Everything else, the cold, the exile, the uncertainty, faded into the background. All that mattered was this, the way she clung to him, the way he couldn't bring himself to let go. Her grip on him tightened, her fingers threading through his hair as if she needed something solid to hold onto. Her body was pressed so close now that he could feel the rhythm of her breathing against his chest, fast, uneven, matching the erratic pounding of his own heart. She wanted this. He could feel it in the way she moved, in the way she leaned into every touch, every kiss. But there was still hesitation and unspoken uncertainty flickering behind her glowing eyes, a silent question neither of them could yet put into words. She pulled back slightly, her lips hovering just above is her breath mingling with his own. "This isn't supposed to happen," she murmured, her voice unsteady. His hands lingered at her waist, feeling the warmth of her beneath his fingertips. "Why not?" Her expression flickered with something almost vulnerable. "Because I'm not human," he exhaled, a quiet laugh brushing a stray strand of her hair away from her face. I noticed she let out a sharp breath, half frustration, half something else. "You don't understand my kind," she hesitated, searching for the right words. "We don't do this with humans," he searched, her face taking the way her brows knitted together, the way her lips were still parted, as if she were struggling to find an explanation that made sense, even to herself. "Then why?" he asked softly. She didn't answer. Instead, her finger was curled against his chest, gripping the fabric of his shirt, as if she were afraid that letting go would break something fragile between them. And then, so quietly he almost didn't hear it, she whispered, "Because I can't stop myself." The words sent a slow, electrifying shiver through him. He swallowed, his voice rougher now. "Then don't." For a moment she simply stared at him, as if trying to determine whether he meant it, whether he really understood the weight of what he was saying. Then something inside her seemed to snap. She surged forward, kissing him again, harder this time, with a desperation that hadn't been there before. Her hands skimmed down his chest, her touch uncertain but hungry, as if she were discovering something new and fascinating. He responded instinctively, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her closer, deepening the kiss until there was nothing between them but heat and breath. The rapid pounding of their hearts, the cot creaked beneath them, but neither of them cared. She made a quiet sound against his lips, something breathless and needy, something that sent a jolt of fire through his veins, and in that moment he knew this wasn't just about warmth anymore. It was something far more dangerous, something neither of them could take back. Her breathing had changed, shifting from shallow hesitancy to something deeper, more consuming. She wasn't just reacting anymore, she was wanting. He could feel it in the way she gripped his shirt, in the way her body pressed against his with quiet urgency, as though fighting a battle within herself. His hands skimmed over her back, feeling the soft ridges of her alien skin beneath his fingertips. She was warm, so warm, as if she held a fire inside her that threatened to consume them both. And yet, despite the intensity of the moment, there was still something fragile about it, something hesitant. She broke the kiss just enough to look at him, her glowing eyes flickering with something unreadable. I've never. The words barely escaped her lips before she stopped herself, as if admitting them out loud made her too vulnerable. He reached up, brushing a loose strand of her silken hair behind her ear. "It's okay," he murmured. "We don't have to rush this." A flicker of conflict crossed her face, but then surprisingly, she let out a soft, breathy laugh. "That's the problem, human." She rested her forehead against her fingers tightening around his collar. "I don't think I want to stop his heart." Pounded. Neither did he. She moved again, this time slower, as if savoring the sensation of every touch her lips found. His jaw lingering, pressing, tasting it, was new to her, he could tell, tentative, but eager, driven more by instinct than experience, and yet every movement of hers sent something sharp and undeniable flooding through his veins. His hands traced down her waist, feeling the way. A breath caught as he pulled her impossibly closer. She exhaled against his skin. This is dangerous. He wasn't sure she meant the situation they were in, or the way she was starting to lose herself in him. Either way, he didn't care. His lips found hers again, and this time there was no hesitation, only heat. Only the growing certainty that this moment was inevitable. Her breath was unsteady, her chest rising and falling against his as she looked at him, with wide, glowing eyes, uncertain, searching. The heat between them had settled into something deeper now, something that neither of them could name but both could feel. She swallowed hard, her fingers still curled against his chest. "I don't understand this. I shouldn't want this." Her voice was barely a whisper, but the weight behind it was undeniable. He could hear the conflict in her tone, the quiet battle raging inside. It wasn't just fear, it was something more, something she wasn't used to. Slowly, gently, he reached up and stroked her cheek, his thumb tracing the warmth of her skin. Her eyes fluttered closed for a moment, as if savoring the touch despite herself. "It's okay," he murmured. "Neither of us expected this." She opened her eyes again, and for the first time she didn't try to fight the emotions swimming behind them. She didn't try to rationalize what had just happened. She just let herself feel it. Without a word, she shifted closer, pressing herself against him, not out of necessity, not just for warmth, but for comfort, for something deeper, something. Neither of them dared to name. His arms wrapped around her, holding her against him, her breathing slowed, matching his. The storm outside still raged, but inside this fragile cocoon of warmth, everything else faded away. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Neither of them moved. She exhaled against his skin. "This changes everything, doesn't it?" He tightened his hold on her, his fingers tracing soothing circles along her back. "Yeah, I think it does." She didn't reply right away. Instead, she relaxed into him, her body fitting against his, as if she had belonged there all along. And in that moment, he realized this wasn't just about survival anymore. This wasn't just about warmth or comfort or even desire. This was fate, and neither of them could fight it any longer. The night passed in quiet stillness, their bodies entwined beneath the thin blankets, no longer out of necessity, but something much deeper. The storm outside had softened, but inside something irreversible had awakened between them. She stirred first, her fingers tracing slow, uncertain patterns against his chest. He felt the hesitation in her touch, as if she were trying to memorize him before reality. "Pull them apart. We can't go back to how things were," she murmured. He shifted, brushing a strand of her silver hair behind her ear. "Do you want to?" Her glowing eyes met his, and for the first time there was no denial, no guarded walls, just acceptance. A quiet smile coasted her lips. "Number," he exhaled, something warm and weightless settling in his chest. He had expected resistance, a return to the cold distance she had once tried to maintain, but instead she stayed close, her body still pressed to his hair, fingers still resting against his skin outside. The snow had stopped. A faint light seeped through the cracks in the shelter's walls, mourning a new beginning. She sat up slightly, her fingers trailing along his jawline before she whispered, "Come with me." He blinked, what she hesitated, as if the words tasted unfamiliar on her tongue. "When this exile is over, when I leave this place, I don't want to go alone." His heart pounded. "Are you saying I don't know what this is?" she interrupted softly. "But I don't want to lose it neither." Did he? A slow, knowing smile formed on his lips. "Then we'll figure it out together." She studied him for a long moment, as if searching for any sign of hesitation. Finding none, she let out a quiet, relieved breath and leaned in, pressing one last lingering kiss to his lips. And in that moment he knew whatever came next, neither of them would face it alone.